Our next step is going to be grabbing the top aluminum extrusion, our last piece, and this is going to be living on the very top. When we were putting on the verticals, I said that if our pieces are kind of leaning off to the side or pinching in together, totally okay, because our bolts going through the very top will actually straighten up our entire frame. That's why we only needed squares to prevent it from coming forward or backwards. We're going to be attaching the top frame with some M5 by 25 bolts. We're going to need 4 of them, and they're going to be going through the 4 sections on our aluminum extrusion. And what you'll notice is there's actually some drilled out portions of the extrusion, and this is where the bolt heads are going to go in there. If you accidentally have this upside down, it means your bolt heads are actually going to be kind of proud of the surface. So we can have this on top and pass through our 4 bolts. And just like tightening up the lug nuts on a wheel, it is actually a little bit easier to just loosely tighten down all of your bolts so that everything is nicely in place, and then finally go back and tighten each one individually. But instead of a star pattern like you would on a tire, we're just going to go back and forth on either side of the frame so we don't get the extrusion lifting up in any weird way. And with our frame as well, we're also going to be adding on these 2 black squares. These are purely just ornamental, and they just go on the 2 ends so you don't see that slightly ugly silvery ends of the extrusion. If you are planning on having some accessories that actually clip onto the side of it, like if you have a tool holder or a spool guide, then you can simply take these off. Our next section is going to be attaching our spool frame and our spool tube onto the very end of our top section. And to do that, we're going to be using the M5 by 8 bolts, the same ones we used for the screen, but we're also going to be using these things called T-nuts. T-nuts can be a little bit of a pain to get sorted out, but they're a really good way how you can put them in the frame, and as you tighten up the bolt, they actually rotate. So then as you're tightening on the bolt and it's pulling that nut upwards, it's actually getting caught in the frame and it can hold a lot of weight. Generally, when you're talking about any type of spool or any filament that you're putting onto your frame, they're either going to come in ½ kilogram, full kilogram, or sometimes even 5 kilograms for industrial purposes. So this little bit of metal has to hold on to a lot of weight. Whenever you grab this frame, you want to make sure that you have the flat portion facing the back side. If you have it on the front, these little corners can actually grab onto the spool as it's coming around, and then you're going to run into a big issue. So we can grab our bolts and pass them through. So we're going to grab our bolts and pass them through the 2 holes, and then we can take our T-nuts with the small knurled section, the small gritty section, facing upwards. These, we're just going to lightly screw them onto our frame, and then we will push them into there. Then we can grab an Allen key and actually start to spin it. Now that we have everything ready to go, we can put our T-nuts, there we go, into our frame, and we want it to be on the left-hand side, but we don't need it to be all the way butted up to that bolt, because we actually want to be able to see our T-nuts through the side. We want to be able to see that they have turned from being with the slot to actually being perpendicular to the slot. And this may take a little bit of time, simply by twisting the bolt in there and just looking when it spins. If it hasn't made a full rotation, you may have to loosen it a couple of revolutions and then keep on trying. Now, a good little trick is if you have a very small magnet, you can actually spin the little bolt next to the magnet and it will actually align the T-nut perfectly. But that feels nice and tight. And then we can do the same thing to the other side. There we go, until I can see it has rotated. and then fully tighten it down. There we go. Now that we have our spool frame on our top extrusion, we can now grab our spool tube and put it through our frame, grab this little wheel that goes on the outside, and then spin our frame so it's nice and tight. And that is the top assembly all done. Now we can move on to the eccentric nuts on either side. Now that we have our top frame nice and secure, it means that our x-axis can now raise up and down in the z-axis nice and smoothly. But we still need to do a test on the eccentric nuts on either side, just so we can verify that it is as perfect as possible. Now we can spin around our printer and take a look at the back side. And when you come into the frame, you'll notice that we have that eccentric nut from our pulley, and we've also got an eccentric nut over here right by our extrusion assembly. Now, just like we did with the y-axis, we're going to spin the wheel, and you can see when I turn this, it isn't moving up and down the frame, which means this wheel is too far away from our extrusion. So you can grab our double-sided wrench, and just like before, give it a little test, turning it one direction, spinning it, and I can feel that's actually spinning looser, which means I want to go in the other direction, which should force the wheel closer to our frame. Another spin. And there we go. When I'm turning the wheel, I can feel it riding up and down the frame, which is perfect. Now I can do the same thing on the opposite side. And that one was perfect right out of the box. Not bad. So now our frame is moving up and down nice and smoothly, and we don't have any gaps on either side of our wheels.